Thanks for the invitation to participate this year as well. I'm sorry I couldn't be present. We have our yearly big event here in the EU IPO Observatory, but I can already hear, just from the pictures, see a lot of familiar faces, and I've been glad to be given this chance to address an issue I find absolutely fascinating. And I heard parts of the previous presentation, which was very clarifying on regards to the UDRP procedure, and I think hopefully some of the things I will bring up in my presentation can then add a little further to that. I started interesting myself with domain names 5 or 6 years ago when I was the first prosecutor in Denmark to launch a seizure under a criminal procedure of a domain name, and that required that I had to deal a little bit with this domain name issues, and since then I found it an absolutely fascinating subject. If you can bring the slides on the screen, okay, thanks a lot. I will say a little bit about domain name administration. I don't know how much that was covered in the previous presentation, but I'll give a few practical points about how I see this area and what we should take into consideration. And then I will come up with case examples, and I come with 7 case law examples, 5 of them civil and 2 of them criminal, illustrating a little bit the different challenges of resolving domain name conflicts. Well, we all know we sit by our computer, we want to go to the EU IPO webpage, but the webpage is placed somewhere on a hosting provider, in this case here in Spain, on a certain IP address, and then to be able to access this hosting of the webpage, the content of the webpage, my computer will ask the domain name system. That is a wide area of thousands of servers all over the world communicating with each other, that will then respond back in a millisecond to me, and I will be able to access the content of the web page. And that brings me to a very fundamental point that I think sometimes right holders want to underestimate a little bit, that domain names are fundamentally technical functionalities. That is, the whole idea of the domain name system is to provide a technical functionality to make the internet work. Now, we have done some research in the EU IPO about the economic importance of domain names, and we go out and ask, for instance, small and medium-sized companies, what are your most important, most valuable intellectual property? They will say domain names, trade secrets, and then trademarks. And that's simply because domain names have gotten this enormous economic importance in marketing, communication to the customers, to their customer base, and in advertising. But that is really a secondary function that came way after the creation of the domain name system. The creator of the domain name system was the late John Postel, that was a computer genius. And he said it very well when he said, a name indicates what we seek, an address indicates where it is, a route indicates how we get there. So his idea, the creation of the domain name system, was basically just to make the functionality of the internet easier. Now, these were before the opening of the internet to general public. This was when it was still part of the US military industrial system, and existed mostly for research purposes. However, of course, when the internet was opened for broader use, the domain name system was part of the package that was then and still exists as a core part of the internet. When we have a look at a URL, what we call a uniform resource locator, it will be this enormously, almost endlessly long string of things, where basically the first part just refers to the software application, in this case the hypertext transfer protocol. And then we have the first order domain. In this case it's .cx. And I will come back to this .cx again and again. My last case example will be a case example from .cx, but I can already now tell you that .cx is the Christmas island. This is the second order domain that is very essential. And then we can have even more third order domain, and we can have other things. Now the third order domain, and what is more to the left of that and what is to the right of the .cx, will be considered content and of very little interest in domain name conflicts. This is a discussion that you can have about these kinds of things, but I think it's generally accepted that everything that is not the first order and the second order domain is to be considered content of the web page, and in that regard of very little relevance to domain name conflict. However, there might be an exception a few times. So this is the focus of the domain name conflicts. Now this is called the root zone file, and basically we can see it, but it's one of the most important functionalities in the working of the internet. And basically, when we're talking about governance of the internet, we are very often, it's popularly called ruling the root. Who rules the root rules the internet. That might be exaggerating it a little bit, but certainly the governance of the domain name system is essential to the governance of the internet. So basically, the root zone file that is not a centralized file exists in one place, but is a file that is spread out, again, over a lot of servers around the world, run by trusted parties that cooperates with ICANN, that is making the governance rules in the area. But it's basically then being able to direct the traffic between the different top-level domains. The first order domains, the top-level domains, as we saw before. Now, there are two types of top-level domains, the generic top-level domains and the country code top-level domains. And when the system was created by John Postel back in 1984, he didn't really make any big distinction whether something was a generic top-level domain or a country code top-level domain. When he made the system, he could have made it completely different. He could have made 5 generic top-level domains. He could have made generic top-level domains, country code top-level domains, and regional city top-level domains if he had wanted to. He decided that for the functionality of this military-run system, it would be convenient that we had some generic top-level domains and some country code top-level domains. For him, there was absolutely no difference, but it could be practical. Let's say an issue was discussed and it had to do with a certain country. It could be practical that that communication happened under a country code top-level domain. Technically, they functioned in completely the same way, and the governance issues were completely the same. When the internet became open for general use, the countries took over the jurisdiction of their own country top-level domains. And it's generally accepted that the generic top-level domain is run in the international system, and the country code top-level domains, it's up to national legislation to determine how they are run, how they are administered, and what kind of dispute resolution system works, and what kind of rules, for instance, in a court procedure, if there is a dispute, what kind of rule will rule and how they are being applied. But technically, they are functioning completely in the same way. Now, ICANN, in the beginning of the internet, administering this system, did that under the complete control of the US government, but at one point it became semi-independent. One of the items of the running of the internet is that all members of the board of directors of ICANN are private sector representatives, and that has been the case for many years now, which basically means that the root is ruled by the internet companies themselves. Governance have only an advisory function. Of course, that can be very important to be able to advise the running of the system. But there are decisions being made in the ICANN system that basically goes against the advice of governments. That is not unusual. So it is truly an independent running of the core functions of the internet. Now, a multi-stakeholder model was introduced in 2006, and that basically now put most of the power into the hands of this private sector. But there was still US jurisdiction over the system, some kind of US control, but that ceased in 2016 when ICANN became a truly independent international organization, and certainly one of the most important, one of the most influential international organizations in the world, as the internet has become the most important piece of human infrastructure ever created. Now, today we have more than 1,200 generic top-level domains. We have the classic ones. They're still the biggest ones if we look at the user base, the .com, .org, and so on. But we got some popular new ones as well in the first wave, where ICANN basically took the old classic generic top-level domains created by John Postel and then opened up for enterprises to have their own top-level domains. And .xyz is a quite popular one, and we're going to see a new rollout of generic top-level domains in a few years. So I think we will not see 1,200 as the final number of generic top-level domains. Today we have 255 country code top-level domains, including from our own countries and the .eu as well, and the .cx for the Christmas Island. I just checked on the 7th of September, and there was 1,544 top-level domains active in the root zone file at that time. And we have to add on that internationalized domains that make it possible for people that are using specific lettering, like the Chinese lettering, they can still access the top-level domains. So that's a practical function more than independently functioning top-level domains. But there is a lot, and the number is growing. There are more than 300 million registered domain names around the world, and all of them with the same basic technical functionality. There's no difference in the technical functionality if you're sitting in Latvia and are in a domain name under the Latvian top-level domain. There's no difference in the technical functionality compared to the Christmas Island. The Christmas Island domain name will function just as well. So there's absolutely technically they function absolutely the same. Around half of the domain names registered will be under the generic top-level domains and about half under the country code. That says something about the popularity of the country code systems. It's really, really been a big success. And I think from a consumer point of view, and it's supported a little bit by some of the research we also done in the EU IPO. We haven't done all that much research into this area, but there seems to be indications that when a consumer is within his own country code top-level domain, he has a higher level of trust that the activity going on that domain is legal. And what many consumers are saying will be, but if it wasn't legal, my authorities would have taken it down. If I'm in .dk, my own country, and a consumer there is doing trade on some activity, or downloading files, or listening to music, or buying sports shoes, or whatever, he will say, but if it wasn't legal, the government, it's openly available to everyone, the authorities would have taken it down. So there is this inherent trust. That trust might not exist to the same degree when you are on a generic top-level domain or on a country code top-level domain of another country. That will very often be in another language and so on. So there is this trust when you're in your own area that things are legal. Let's have a look at .cx, the Christmas Island, small island south of India, 2,000 people population. The capital is Flying Fish Cove. And it has been decided, and that illustrates a little bit the independence of the country code, top-level domains. It has been decided by the government of Christmas Island that the domain name registry is located in New Zealand. That's an organization called COCA. They administer a lot of these small island state country code top-level domains. And then they have decided when we have a conflict, we are applying the laws of Australia. Now, of course, when we have a country code top-level domain, they will normally have the registry in their own country, will normally apply their own law, but it is completely up to the country to decide under which rules they will put up the dispute resolutions, whether it is outside the court system or it is within a court system. But in this case, we see a complex legal situation where we have involved 3 countries to determine the jurisdiction of conflicts over this country code top-level domain. Now, I said that domain names are under the ICANN root. Yes and no. There's lots of domain names that work technically that are not in the ICANN root. And I give you 2 examples of that. First of all, this is when we are on the darknet. This was a web page called Amazon and then some letters and numbers .onion. So when using a downloaded Firefox modified browser, one could go to a web page called Amazon Dark. It used precisely the artwork, the general presentation that we know from the Amazon shops. But they called Amazon Dark, and you could buy all kinds of illegal stuff there. And there's no doubt in this domain name that functions as a domain name that there is a violation of the Amazon trademark. And it's also for trading, and it's a marketplace and so on. So there's no doubt we have a trademark infringement. So who has the jurisdiction over this one? There's no doubt under criminal procedure, a civil procedure being unrealistic in this realm here, but certainly on the criminal procedure, action can be taken about this one. But there is no UDRP working here because it's not part of the ICANN root. If it's not part of the ICANN root, the UDRP will not apply. So in this case here, there is no dispute resolution outside, in practice, a criminal procedure. Let me give you another example of a domain name outside the ICANN root. This is a new service that was launched in April of this year that is run by the Ethereum. Ethereum is a virtual currency run on blockchain technology. And they opened up for registration, and this is the site, and I made a search for louisvuitton.eth. And it is already owned. It looks like this, and the organization buying this can be identified as this hexadecimal code. Now, I do not know whether it is the Louis Vuitton Malaysia company that has done this registration. With my knowledge of brand protection departments in major companies, their knowledge of blockchain is so limited on virtual currencies that I doubt very much that it is Louis Vuitton behind this. Now, this works not, if you put this domain name up, it will not work because you will be communicating to the ICANN root system. But if you download a little add-on to the browser, these kinds of domain names will work technically, completely, as functionally as domain names under the ICANN root. And there is no dispute resolution. If you go into the ENS guidelines here, they simply say, we contemplated making a dispute resolution, but that was too complicated. So today there is no dispute resolution system. There will only be a criminal or a civil procedure, and raising all kinds of jurisdictional issues, of course, because of this is run decentralized. But this is just an example that the world is changing, and we are getting these functioning domain names, fully functioning domain names on a technical field that is outside the root and outside of the UDRP system. Now, my case law examples, that I will go over here. I've taken these examples, a classic one, panavision.com. I've taken a Danish case and a French case that deals with what happens when a UDRP case goes to court. I've taken a case that never went to a dispute resolution procedure from Denmark, one from the US. I have a special fondness for this US ruling. I think it's a brilliant ruling, and I think it illustrates some of the things we have to consider when we are on the internet always. And then I have two criminal cases from Denmark. And in case number 7, we end up in a Danish criminal case, we end up on the Christmas Island. These are civil cases, these are criminal cases, mostly for the reason of perspective. Now, I try to make a little drawing for each of the cases, just to illustrate that when we are on the internet, everything is international, everything is cross-border. Very few cases actually can be resolved within one jurisdiction. This is an exception to the rule, because we had the right holder, Panavision, incorporated with their headquarters in California. The registrant of the domain name panavision.com resided in Illinois, and on the web page were displayed photographs from the city of Pana in Illinois, Panavision, Visions of Pana, and the registry for .com was and still is VeriSign in Virginia. Actually, one of the companies that is also running the ICANN route and is essential in the functioning of the internet. And there came this very famous court ruling, and the reason why I was just saying in the beginning that a domain name is a technical function is because it is addressed in this classic ruling that came in the beginning of the commercialization of the internet. We saw really first the internet becoming really, really commercial and used for commercial marketing around the year 2000. But it began to come in the late 1990s, where, and this case came at that point where slowly the internet began to be of commercial value. Now, Dennis Taupin registered this domain name, and it directed traffic to a website showing pictures of this city. And Panavision tried to register their brand as a .com domain name, but they were rejected by VeriSign because it had already been registered by Dennis Taupin. Now, Taupin offered to sell the domain name to Panavision for $13,000, and he had done likewise to a number of major US companies. Now, VeriSign didn't want to have any part of this conflict. They served as most registries. There was a come first served. If you're the first to register, you get the domain name, and then basically disputes will have to be resolved in another venue. They didn't see any responsibility for this conflict. And now Panavision sued Taupin in California, where the courts confirmed to have jurisdiction. And then comes this classic ruling where they first determined that Taupin's business model was to register domain names and try to sell them to the trademark proprietors. The court had to find out how to deal with a domain name in a legal sense, and they made a quote from a legal article that had come up at one point, and they identified a domain name as having dual functions. The first function was the technical function, the postal function, the location identifier, the post office metaphor, basically, that the domain name is simply a tool to direct traffic on the internet. And then they said, no, but they are also something else. They are also a content indication. So by seeing the domain name, the user of the internet gets an idea what is actually on this website. And when we are talking about well-known trademarks, it can also be an indication of the origin of the content. And certainly, I think we cannot argue that Panavision is a very well-known trademark all over the world. And then the court concluded Taupin had made commercial use of the well-known trademark, even if he was not using the website to market goods or services, but there was still a commercial use by this extortion, so to speak, of the Panavision company. And the Panavision trademark had been subject to dilution. This ruling created the UDRP. Basically, the right holders, after this ruling came, demanded a system put in place to be able to resolve these kinds of conflicts. A work was initiated in WIPO, went very, very fast, and basically built on this ruling, the system came into existence. And the first ruling in the UDRP was concerning the World Wrestling Federation, and they quote this court order or this court ruling from California as part of the reasoning why, in that case, they come to the same conclusion as in the Panavision case, that there had been registration with the aim of selling to the trademark holder. It had been in bad faith, and there had been no legitimate interest, all the things that we heard about before as the criteria for a UDRP decision. But it really all originated with this court ruling here that was revolutionary and visionary at the time. Let's take a UDRP decision. I'm taking this Danish case here, Børsen. And here we have a registrant in Denmark, Digital Marketing. We have a newspaper in Denmark that is the leading business periodical, and they have their HQ in Denmark. And we're still a little international here because we are in .com area, so the registry is in the US. Børsen, the newspaper, have a strong standing in Denmark and have several trademark registrations and operates different Danish domain names. Digital Marketing was founded in 1986 and provided information technological services, including a marketplace for domain names named the Name Exchange, Navnebørsen. And the Danish word Børsen basically means exchange. It is a commonly used term for an exchange. In this case, exchange of domain names, the name exchange, the name Børsen. And they registered Børsen and Børsen in 1996. That was the thing about the Danish letter with this O and a line through it. That couldn't be registered at that time. You can do that today, but not at that time. So Børsen goes to WIPO, files a complaint. A sole panelist finds that the domain name should be transferred to Børsen. Okay, he found confusingly similar, true, no doubt about that. No prior rights for the registrant, true, and that it was registered in bad faith. Yeah, the criteria are met. Now, the registrant within the 10 days, as we heard, goes to court. He goes to the specialized trademark court in Denmark, that is the Danish Commercial and Maritime Court. And they test the 3 UDRP criteria and they uphold the WIPO decision. They very scrutinize every of the 3 criteria, and then they say this is a correct decision. That is appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court takes another approach. They apply Danish trademark law, and then they find there is a trademark violation under Danish law. True. And then they say the 3 UDRP conditions for transferal are met. And then they say the courts do not have the task to examine the decisions of the private dispute resolution body, WIPO. And I think that follows very well what we heard in the last decision, in the last presentation. You apply, in a case like this, national law. You can look at the UDRP conditions because we are in a contractual area. A contract has been signed. Everybody as part of the ICANN root system will be tied down by some kind of contract that accepts the UDRP conditions. But we are not examining whether the WIPO decision is correct or not. We are making our own completely independent judicial decision. And that's what the Supreme Court reached here. The Danish courts apply national trademark law, or EU trademark law, if that would be relevant in the case. It wasn't in this case, and test the UDRP criteria without examining the underlying UDRP decision. Now that leads me to this case here from France about Mubitalk. And here we are also in .com area. We have the right holder Tim Riga in Sweden. we have the registrant of the domain name, that is a Middle Eastern company, Stone Age, and then we have this domain name, movitalk.com. The complainant, the Swedish company, was founded in 2009, and they specialized in products and services concerning mobile phones, and they held a European trademark, Multi-Talk, mainly for telecommunication services. The registrant was running a Middle Eastern group of companies working within telecommunications that had used the suffix mubi, phonetic Arabic for mobi, as in mobile phones, for several years. And he registered Mobitalk in 2011. Now, Tim Rieger goes to UDRP, gets a transferal, and the decision is brought before the French courts, exactly as in the Danish case. Now, there is some confusion here, and really we can disregard that because there is a transfer of the right from Tim Rieger to a Maltese company, and they intervene, and that's technicalities. It doesn't really matter so much. Well, we go to the French courts, and they dismiss Mr. X's objection against the transfer of the domain name, and they say there have been a violation of the European trademark in the EU, and the Arab company owner, Mr. X, appeals the decision. And then the Paris Court of Appeal comes with this decision. They say there is identity between the used mark in the domain name and the EU trademark. True, we can see that. That's very easy to reach that conclusion. The website connected to the domain name was targeting only Arabic countries, not any EU member states. Therefore, there was no infringement of the trademark in the EU, and the domain name was not transferred. So we have a correct UDRP decision, but going to court in the correct jurisdiction overturns the decision. No transfer due to the use not of Arabic trademark law, but due to the use of European trademark law, because there was no targeting of the marketing on the underlying web page. That will be a consequence of the system that has been put into place. So we take Børsen, Mobitalk, they're completely logical to each other. They follow exactly the same logic. You apply national or EU trademark law, but it can come with that undesired consequence that a correct UDRP decision cannot be enforced. This is a case about a Danish domain name, UPS. UPS, we know, is this big parcel provider in the US. The registrant was a company in Denmark, and the registry is run by an independent company under contract with the Danish government in Denmark. And they had a lot of trademark registrations, and they were also commercially operating in Denmark. The registrant had registered a lot of different .dk domain names and said that he wanted to create something with sustainable energy, uninterruptible power supply, but never took the domain name into use. It was inactive for years. UPS initiated court proceedings 2 years after the domain registration, and they tried to buy this domain name from the registrant several times, and he rejected because he said, I want to start doing this energy company at a later point. The Danish Commercial Court found that he had a real intention to use the domain name in the energy sector. And they said, well, UPS is actually a generically normally used word for ensuring stable electricity. There was no trademark infringement, no transfer of the domain name. That goes to the Supreme Court, and they say they found that he had actually probably considered using the registrant in using this domain name in the energy sector, but he had taken, after years and years and years, taken no active steps to do that. Therefore, the maintainment of the registration of an inactive domain name was not happening in the pursuit of a legitimate interest. And there was a transfer of the domain name, quoting the law on unfair marketing practices, not quoting the trademark law. The Maritime Court decision is based on trademark law, but here the Supreme Court determines that there might not have been a trademark violation because the domain name was never actively taken into use to market goods or services. But the fact that they are maintaining this domain name without taking it into use after years and years and years could be an unfair marketing practice and transfer the domain name. Under UDRP, this would never have led to a transfer because you had, as we heard before, you have to have the bad faith at the time of registration. So, and here it was found that the registrant might have been in good faith at the time of registration, but simply was so inactive in getting the domain name into use. Now, this is the case from that I wanted to quote from the US, which I like a lot. I really like this ruling a lot because it takes into consideration that the internet was not only created for commercial use, it was actually also created for free speech. And I think there's something we always have to take into consideration on the internet, the balance of interest between the fundamental rights, including the free speech and free access to information, and the commercial interest of right holder organizations. This was the website of the Utah Lighthouse Ministry. The Utah Lighthouse Ministry was created to criticize the Church of the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They registered trademark and operated an online bookstore at this domain name. Now, there was a counteraction against UTLM, and that was the organization of FAIR that was run by the church, and they were a volunteer organization that was fighting against, when somebody was criticizing the church, they would be fighting against that. And they also operated an online bookstore. They registered this and several other domain names in 2003, and with all kinds of different combination of things connected to the criticism organization. At the time of the court decisions, the domain names were no longer active. The underlying website under the utlm.org was a parody of the Utah Lighthouse Ministry's webpage. They used exactly the same style elements, but then they wrote destroy, mislead, and deceive across the webpage. And then they were saying this is not the webpage of Utah Lighthouse Ministry, but it is a webpage about the Utah Lighthouse Ministry. There was no disclaimer that this webpage was not connected to the ministry. And there was no advertising and no goods or services for sale, but there were links to commercial activity. The appeal court upholds the district court decision. The website did not identify UTLM, the ministry, as the source of goods and services. They did not directly promote sales, but only linked to such sales. And then they say something essential here that I like very much. The fact that the website is a successful parody weighs heavily against the finding of likelihood of confusion. A parody adopts some features of the original mark, but relies upon a difference from the original mark to produce its desired effects. We have to take into consideration that this was basically a fight between two organizations using whatever means of communication was at their disposal. And in this way, we have, and as the court here does, takes freedom of speech into consideration in the overall decision of the case. I know this is very disputed. I've discussed this with many people that works with domain names, and there might be people who disagree with me on this, but I think the appeal court here, they get it absolutely right here. I think it's a brilliant court ruling. And also in the big commentary on domain name law, it is actually a whole page devoted just to this case here. So certainly it's widely quoted anyway. And it's good for actually creating a debate nevertheless. I'm coming to my last two cases. I'll do it quickly. This is Lene Espersen.dk. Lene Espersen was the Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs. If you went to the official webpage of the Danish Parliament in October 2015, it looked like this. There was a sub-page for Lene Espersen. She had gone out of politics at the time, but there was still information about her politics. There was a link to her webpage. leneespersen.dk. If you press that one, you would be presented for sales of counterfeit Abercrombie & Fitch. Now, that is challenging because normal domain name logic, go back to Panavision, would say, if somebody wants to sell Abercrombie & Fitch, why don't you write Abercrombie & Fitch in the domain name? That would be domain name logic, right? You want to attract people to buy counterfeit Abercrombie & Fitch. You put some kind of sale of Abercrombie & Fitch, cheap Abercrombie & Fitch. You would somehow reflect Abercrombie & Fitch in the domain name. But not here. This is Lene Espersen. Now, there's no contact details. It's clearly counterfeit products. I don't think there can be any doubt of that. If you look at the registry, you can see it was registered by a Chinese entity. The domain name had been given up by Lene Espersen in November and had been reacquired by a Chinese entity a few days later, as soon as it was made available for re-registration. And then they put up a web page. And he had done it many other times, actually. The same entity had done this many other times. Actually, it was a whole business model of systematically re-registering previously used domain names. I want to promote now a study that is coming out from the EU IPO, will be published next month, where we analyze the situation in Sweden, Germany, UK, and Spain. You will be astonished about the size of this activity. We are talking not thousands of domain names at any given time doing exactly the same. We're talking tens of thousands, just in those 4 countries. Now, to counter this, I think this is interesting. It was possible and has been repeatedly done by Danish prosecution, going in a criminal procedure, presenting in a file each of these domain names, and were able to obtain a bulk seizure order of 422 domain names. Now they have seized more than 1,000 under exactly the same. So what in a UDRP or a civil procedure will be a long procedure, complicated, looking into each domain, maybe a few at the same time, but each domain at a time, we're actually able for a procedure taking 30 minutes because it was very well prepared. It was able to obtain a bulk seizure order of 423 domain names. How many decisions have been taken on the UDRP since it was created? Maybe 40, 50,000 decisions. But if I can find 100,000 domain names in any given day, just in Western Europe, in country code top-level domains, and then of course there come dispute resolutions under the national systems. These systems are great. They're fantastic systems. But the number game is astonishing. So the numbers of infringement. So we also probably need some criminal procedures that are able, when things are happening on this completely automated and industrialized way, as it was documented here and as our report next month will also document. We probably also need other kinds of tools available for an effective domain name enforcement. The theory is, and that will be supported by our research, that we have a lot of domain names, tens of thousands of domain names directing to very few shops run by very few entities. So what will be completely overwhelming when you look at it might, when you look at the business structure, might actually not be that overwhelming. I think probably this is a natural area for criminal enforcement. There is also the fact with Lene Espersen that Lene Espersen doesn't care about her domain name. She gave it up. So she could go to the Danish dispute resolution, the parallel to the UDRP, make a complaint, pay the fee, file all the papers. Why should she do that? She doesn't care about it. She don't want the domain name anymore. And that's the problem with all these deleted domain names. The right holder doesn't care, because the right holder has no commercial interest in regards to the infringement that is going on the underlying web page. And that shows that civil procedure or dispute resolution procedure will not be effective. There will be no one to file the complaint. And if now Abercrombie & Fitch were to file the complaint, they would not have any interest in the domain name. They might be able to do it under civil procedure, but what about all the other domain names with other right holders, that maybe one right holder per domain name, it would be very complicated. Here's a natural area, I think, for criminal enforcement. Let me come with my last case. It's a television card sharing case where basically people going to this webpage and paying the fee had access to illegal television signals. The defendants were placed in Denmark. The server was in Germany. The registrar of the domain name was in the UK. It was under the Christmas Island jurisdiction, and the registry was in New Zealand. Sometimes when I do cases about sales of counterfeit medicines, I'm having like 15 different jurisdictions that are involved in the same case. Wow, the internet is really challenging us here, but this is the reality. We can't help it. That's one criminal case as something else. Look at the domain name here. Are they infringing anyone? They're really smart here. They're putting up the name of the activity card pro.ath. ATH doesn't infringe anything. So they're very smart here, the infringers here, because they are just using this domain name to maintain traffic from their customers, but they're not interested in actually having a dispute over the second level domain here, or the ATH. They're not interested in a conflict around that one. So they are intent. They will full intent not using something that infringes anyone. They only use the technical functionality, and they're placing themselves on .cx to avoid any jurisdiction, for instance, from a European court. Now, the case came after investigation. The two defendants were sentenced under copyright infringement and violation of conditional access to 30 days suspended prison and 5 months suspended prison. One of them accepted the ruling, and the other one is under appeal, and the appeal ruling will come sometime soon. Now, there is no decision about the domain name in this court ruling. It wasn't raised by the prosecution, and of course the court then didn't decide upon it. But if I go into the policy for this top-level domain that is available on the website of COCA, we can actually see that they have a complaint resolution system where public authorities can make a complaint. And they can do that complaint based on abuse of intellectual property rights, as well as many other criminalities or illegalities. And when we look at the criteria, they can take not only the domain name into consideration, but the underlying activity on the web page. So I would recommend in the future that when there is such cases here, I would recommend to the prosecution, make a request to the court under the criminal procedure to seize the domain name. I know it cannot be executed in the country of the seizure, but then translate the decision into English, send it down to COGA, and see if they will not be able to transfer the domain name to the prosecution service of that country. If they apply to their own rules, we will have a court order that says it, and why should they not comply with that if they follow their own criteria? That's just to say, think out of the box. When we are on the internet, we need to find the solution that works best in each different situation, and this could be the way in this situation to resolve the case, because we are in a jurisdiction far, far away in a different galaxy all along. But there might be an option, and this COCA will have similar policies for a lot of other country code top-level domains in that whole area. Top-level domains that are very often used for criminal activity. And that is just an indication. Why not try to do that? There is no doubt that the Danish court could have made a seizure order. I have had seizure orders for .coms and tried to have them executed under mutual legal assistance. That's one thing, but here we could actually take it one step further and use this voluntary put in place resolution mechanism of the .cx country code top-level domain. I have run over time. I'm very, very sorry. Just because I find this subject so fascinatingly interesting that I can't help myself. I'm very sorry. I hope you found it enjoyable. I don't know what's next on your program, but thank you very much for paying attention. Thank you.
Mr. Vestergārds, do we have maybe some questions? Because we have some time to ask some questions. Do we have something? Yes, we have some question. But microphone, yeah? We have some question. We have a question actually to you. Bet māja nāc te, lai tevi redz, te ir kaut kur ekrāns. Nāc šurp. Te.
I'm sorry, my question is more to Miss Hartung, not to Mr. Vestergārds.
Okay.
Okay, yeah?
Yeah. Maybe questions to Mr. Vestergārds. Do we have some questions? No, there are no questions. Then we can one more time to thank Mr. Vestergārds.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.